Imagine walking into a dealership, right?
Yeah.
Slapping down $50,000 and riding out on a machine that revs to like 16,500 RPM.
Oh, yeah. It's completely wild.
I mean, it generates its own gravitational pull through advanced aerodynamics, and yet it relies on the exact same analog suspension concept as like a 1990s dirt bike.
Right.
You are essentially buying a surface-to-surface missile that just, happens to have mirrors and a license plate.
It is the absolute definition of engineering pushed to the absolute edge of sanity. I mean, you are taking a vehicle designed for professional athletes to race on closed circuits, and, well, you're putting it in traffic.
Yeah.
It requires a completely different understanding of physics to even operate safely.
Well, welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, we are taking you on a journey to the absolute extremes of two-wheeled engineering, focusing on a jaw-dropping track weapon, the Ducati Panigale V4R.
Oh, man, what a bike.
It is. But we aren't stopping in the stratosphere. We're also going to explore the stark reality of everyday street riding, the incredibly dangerous illusion of electronic rider aids, and the foundational mechanical skills you actually need to survive out there on the asphalt.
Because having a machine capable of breaking the speed limit in first gear, well, it doesn't mean anything if you don't actually understand the physical forces acting on the rubber holding you to the road.
Exactly. And to figure all this out, we have a massive stack of materials today. We're pulling from Ducati's official technical specs, track test reviews from motorcycle.com, expert riding guides from Visor Down and Cycle World.
Some really great insights in those, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. And we are even digging into Reddit threads like REY6R and RKI44 just to hear from real riders dealing with real-world machines. So, okay, let's unpack this.
We really have to start by looking at that Ducati, the Panigale V4R.
Right.
The reason this motorcycle even exists in this format is because of a concept called homologation.
Yeah, I saw that word all over the reviews, homologation special. What does that actually mean in practice, like for the buyer?
It means Ducati wants to race this exact motorcycle design in the World Superbike Championship. But the rule book for that racing series, it states that you cannot just build a one-off $1 million prototype.
Okay.
You have to race a production motorcycle. You must sell a certain number of them to the general public first.
You got it.
So Ducati essentially takes their World Superbike race chassis, slaps some headlights, turn signals, and a license plate bracket on it just to appease the government, and sells it to anyone with a heavy enough wallet.
And the heart of this machine is the 998cc Desmo CDC Stradale RV4 engine. I was looking at the spec sheet, and the numbers, frankly, look like typos.
They do.
It says this engine hits 16,500 RPM in sixth gear and 16,000 RPM in the lower gears. How does a 1-liter engine even survive spinning that fast without just physically exploding?
It all comes down to the internal geometry of the engine, specifically the relationship between the bore, which is the width of the cylinder,
Right.
and the stroke, which is how far the piston travels up and down. This engine has a massive 81-millimeter bore, but an incredibly short stroke.
Okay, so it's really wide and shallow.
Exactly. And because the piston doesn't have to travel very far up and down, it can complete that journey far more times per second.
So smaller movements mean faster movements.
Exactly. But you still have metal scraping against metal tens of thousands of times a minute. So to survive that friction, the internal weight savings are just obsessive.
Right, the DLC coating.
Yes, the cast aluminum pistons are coated in DLC, diamond-like carbon, to make them brutally hard but incredibly slick, which reduces parasitic friction.
Yeah.
And the connecting rods that push those pistons, they're made of titanium.
Wow.
They are actually gun-drilled, meaning they are hollowed out down the center to save a fraction of a gram, and they use controlled shot peening at the base to harden the metal against the immense stress.
So they are literally hollowing out titanium just to let the engine spin a tiny bit faster. What does that actually translate to when you twist the throttle? Like, what are the numbers?
Well, in its standard Euro 5 plus street-legal configuration, straight off the showroom floor, it makes 218 horsepower.
Which is already terrifying on a vehicle that weighs barely over 400 pounds.
Oh, absolutely. But if you take it to the track, you remove those restrictive street mufflers, you bolt on the titanium Akrapovic racing exhaust, and you pour in the specially formulated Ducati Course Performance Oil.
Just special oil.
Yeah, special oil.
Sure.
The output jumps to a mind-bending 240.5 horsepower.
That is insane.
Right, some specific tuning configurations rated at 239 horsepower. Either way, you were looking at a machine capable of exceeding 330.6 kilometers per hour.
Over 205 miles per hour. That is just absurd. And from the reviews, it sounds like going that fast creates a whole new problem, right? The bike literally wants to take flight.
Yes, at those speeds, air pressure gets trapped under the front of the motorcycle and literally tries to lift the front wheel off the ground. So Ducati brought over aerodynamics straight from their 2021 MotoGP season.
All right, the corner side pods. I saw pictures of these in the specs. They look like strange gills on the side of the fairings. But how do they help if you are leaning over in a corner? I mean, going in a straight line, sure, but in a corner.
That is the brilliant part. They aren't just for straight line speed. When you lean the motorcycle over into a corner, those side pods get very close to the asphalt.
Oh, I see.
They are designed to funnel air and create a ground effect. It's a vacuum that physically sucks the side of the bike down toward the tarmac.
That is wide.
It pushes the tires harder into the pavement, giving the rider vastly better mid-corner grip. And then when you stand the bike up and hit 300 kilometers per hour on the straightaway, the large carbon fiber biplane wings on the front generate a massive 6 kilograms of downward force.
So it's invisible aerodynamic weight just gluing you to the track. And tying all that force together is what Ducati calls their hollow symmetrical swing arm and a revised front frame. The guys at motorcycle.com noted that this specific frame gives the bike razor-sharp entry. It just dives into corners effortlessly.
Yeah, the handling is legendary.
But I want to pivot to a part of this bike that the hardcore Ducati purists are just losing their minds over.
I know exactly what you're going to say, the dry clutch.
Yes. The spec sheet says the Panigale V4R uses an STM EVO SBK dry slipper clutch with 9 pressure plates. Now, most motorcycles use a wet clutch, meaning the clutch plates are swimming in the same oil that lubricates the engine.
Correct.
So why would a top-tier track bike go out of its way to use a dry clutch that operates completely exposed outside of the engine oil bath?
It really comes down to parasitic drag and heat. In a standard wet clutch, the engine oil provides cooling and makes engaging the clutch very smooth for street riding. But spinning those heavy clutch plates through a bath of thick oil, well, it robs the engine of a tiny amount of horsepower.
Ah, like trying to run through water in a swimming pool.
Exactly. On a racetrack, you want zero drag. A dry clutch spins entirely in the open air. Furthermore, the aggressive friction material on a racing clutch creates a lot of dust as it wears down.
Oh, and you don't want that in the engine.
Right. By keeping it dry and outside the engine block, that abrasive dust doesn't contaminate the engine oil. It also allows mechanics to easily adjust the slipper function, which prevents the rear wheel from locking up during aggressive downshifts without having to drain the engine oil first.
Which brings back that iconic metallic dry clutch rattle. Because there's no oil dampening the sound, the metal plates literally clack against the clutch basket. It sounds like a coffee can full of loose bolts being shaken up, and honestly, Ducati fans adore it.
They really do.
Getting a rattling, exposed clutch past modern Euro 4 and EPA noise regulations must have required some serious bureaucratic gymnastics. But honestly, looking at the price tag of this machine, I have to push back on one of their engineering choices.
Really? What stands out to you?
The price is $49,995 in the US, 50 grand. But if you look at the suspension, it uses fully mechanical Öhlins suspension. Specifically, the NTX 2530 pressurized fork and the TTX 36 shock.
Okay, yes.
Today, even sport touring bikes that cost half as much have fancy active electronic suspension. You know, solenoids that adjust the damping hundreds of times a second as you ride over bumps. Why does a $50,000 hyperbike use analog suspension where you have to turn physical clickers with a screwdriver? How is that not a massive step backward?
It seems completely counterintuitive until you understand the psychology and really the sensory needs of a professional racer. Active electronic suspension is a miracle on the street. If you hit a pothole or a patch of rough asphalt, the computer instantly softens the suspension to absorb the impact.
Right.
But a racetrack doesn't have potholes. It is perfectly paved.
Oh, right. The environment is controlled.
Exactly. When a professional rider is pushing a motorcycle to the absolute physical limit of tire grip, they rely entirely on the subtle vibrations and feedback coming through the handlebars. They need absolute, unwavering consistency.
That makes sense.
If the computer suddenly softens the fork while they are trail braking into a corner at 150 miles per hour because it detected a microscopic bump, well, the the geometry of the bike changes mid-corner.
And the rider loses all trust in what the bike is doing.
Precisely. Mechanical suspension delivers a predictable analog response every single time, does exactly what you tune it to do, nothing more, nothing less.
That makes total sense. The machine has to be a perfectly predictable instrument. Which brings us to another wild mechanical choice, the Ducati racing gearbox, or DRG. On a normal motorcycle, neutral is wedged right between first and second gear. But on the V4R, neutral is located below first gear.
Which mirrors the setup of a MotoGP prototype.
Right. And to get into neutral, they use the Ducati neutral lock, or DNL. You have to deliberately pull a separate lever on the handlebar just to access it. Let me try to visualize this. Imagine a staircase where the set for neutral is normally right between the first and second floors. When you are rushing up or down, it's really easy to accidentally trip on that middle step. The DRG layout basically takes that neutral step, moves it all the way down to the basement, and puts a locked door in front of it.
That is a perfect analogy. And the reason you lock that door is because tripping on that step in 180 miles per hour is catastrophic. When a rider is at the end of a long straightaway, squeezing the brakes and aggressively kicking down through the gears, they rely on engine braking to help slow the bike down.
But if they accidentally tap the shifter lightly and get stuck in neutral,
they instantly lose all engine braking. The bike feels like it surges forward, the suspension gets unloaded, and they will likely crash straight off the track. Moving neutral to the absolute bottom, below first gear, removes the physical possibility of a false neutral. You get incredibly fast, repeatable shifts between first and second gear without that dead space in between.
it's ruthless, pure race logic. The journalist at motorcycle.com got to test this on a track at Buttonwillow in California. The bike was actually lent to them by a private owner, Jerry Madman Morris. And they noted that despite all this insane power, the aggressive gearbox and aftermarket upgrades like OZ-forged wheels, the acceleration is surprisingly linear. The bike doesn't try to actively murder you.
But we have to be very careful with words like linear and manageable. Those are highly relative terms used by veteran test riders. A machine with over 200 horsepower is never truly safe. Yes, the V4R has brilliant electronics. It has a grip meter on the dash. It has race brake control. But these systems create a psychological trap.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because there was a terrifying assumption floating around the motorcycle community. Riders, especially newer ones, think that modern electronic rider aids can save a bad rider from themselves.
They really do. They view the technology as a magical, impenetrable safety net that overrides the laws of physics rather than what it actually is, a localized mechanical assist.
We look at some sources investigating the BMW S1000RR. It's another 200 horsepower liter bike. Pulling from a test by the YouTube channel Yami Noob and diving into Reddit threads on our Motorrad, you see this terrifying trend.
It's so common.
Yeah, inexperienced riders are buying these massive superbikes, and their justification is, oh, it's fine, I'll just keep it in rain mode while I learn. They literally think rain mode digitally shrinks the engine down to a little 400cc puppy dog.
And that is a potentially lethal misconception. When Yami Noob put that S1000RR on a dyno in rain mode and went full throttle, the reality became very clear. Rain mode on that BMW still delivers 180 horsepower.
Wait, hold on. 180 horsepower is rain mode. I mean, that is more horsepower than my entire car. How on earth is that considered a safety feature for a beginner?
It isn't. What rain mode actually does is act as an adaptive dynamic traction control. It softens the initial twist of the throttle, but if you keep twisting and you're going in a straight line and the computer senses that the rear tire has traction well, it will give you all 180 horsepower.
Sure.
Once that engine crosses 8,000 RPM, it pulls exactly like a screaming 600cc race replica. It is not an anti-death setting. It will gladly let you accelerate into a brick wall at 150 miles per hour if you ask it to.
The Cycle World source points out exactly why this happens, citing the Dunning-Kruger effect.
What's fascinating here is how our brains process digital technology. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias where people with low ability vastly overestimate their skills because they don't even know what they don't know.
Right. Ignorance is confidence.
When you add a computer to the mix, human beings associate digital intervention with infallibility. We assume the computer can bend physics. But the computer is still entirely bound by the mechanical grip of a piece of rubber the size of a credit card touching the pavement.
A perfect example of this is cornering ABS. It is a brilliant technology. It allows you to grab the brakes while leaning over in a corner, and the computer manages the slip so the front tire doesn't lock up and wash out. But the catch is, you still have to actually squeeze the brake lever.
Exactly. We see this all the time. Riders develop a fundamental psychological fear of touching the front brake in a corner. If you panic, freeze up, and target fixate on the guardrail, all the cornering ABS in the world will not save you.
Yeah, it won't break for you.
The computer cannot reach out and squeeze the brake lever. Tech cannot fix a fundamental lack of physical technique.
And those beginner errors are so incredibly common. We looked at a guide from the Wood Law firm detailing the most frequent mistakes. Things that no microchip can prevent. Stalling the bike in traffic because of poor analog clutch control. Dropping the bike at 5 miles an hour in a parking lot.
Very common.
Yeah, or having wobbly, uncertain counter steering because the rider doesn't understand that to turn right at speed, you actually push the right handlebar forward.
They also noted psychological errors like tunnel vision. You stare at the oncoming car instead of looking through your escape route, and your hands naturally steer the bike directly toward what you're looking at, or simply running out of gas on a busy highway.
Oh, right, because a lot of motorcycles don't even have fuel gauges. You just have to physically shake the bike back and forth between your legs and listen to hear if fuel is sloshing around in the tank. It is a wildly analog world.
It is. And if putting a superbike in rain mode won't save you from these analog realities, the only thing that will is mastering the physical mechanics of riding.
Which brings us to the single most important mechanical skill you can learn, whether you are on a 400cc commuter or that $50,000 Panigale V4R trail braking.
Trail braking is the art of leaving the brakes applied, smoothly trailing off the pressure as you lean the motorcycle down into a corner. The traditional, outdated advice was to do all your braking in a straight line, let go of the brakes, and coast through the turn. But our visor-down source and advanced training research break down the physics of why trail braking is absolutely critical for survival.
It's not just about shedding speed, right? It physically changes the shape of the motorcycle. Picture yourself barreling toward a corner at 80 miles an hour.
Right. When you apply the brakes as you enter the turn, weight violently transfers to the front of the motorcycle. This does two physical things. First, it literally squishes the front tire carcass into the pavement. It flattens the rubber, taking that credit card-sized contact patch and expanding it, generating massive mechanical grip right at the moment you demand the tire to turn.
Like taking a rubber eraser and just mashing it into a desk,
Yeah.
The harder you push down, the more grip it has. What's the second physical change?
Steering geometry. We have to understand rake and trail. Think of the caster wheels on the front of a shopping cart. They sit at an angle, trailing behind the pivot point to keep the cart stable. That angle is the rake. When you brake on a motorcycle, the front forks compress, diving downward. This physically steepens the rake angle, bringing the front wheel closer to the engine.
Which shortens the whole wheelbase of the bike.
Precisely. A shorter wheelbase makes a vehicle vastly easier to rotate. By trail braking, you are mathematically altering the bike's geometry to make it turn into the corner with a fraction of the physical effort.
And the third benefit of trail braking is purely just having a safety valve. If you are trailing the brake into a blind curve and suddenly there's a stalled car in your lane, your fingers are already physically resting on the brake lever, and the front suspension is already compressed and stable. You could just squeeze a little harder to stop.
Exactly.
If you aren't trail braking and you panic grab the brakes with a completely relaxed front suspension, the bike will buck, the tire will lock, and you will go down.
But you cannot learn a physical skill like this by just watching a YouTube video. It requires structured muscle memory, which is why structured training programs like the Motorcycle Safety Foundation for absolute beginners or the Yamaha Champ School for high-speed mastery are the only ways to build a foundation that won't disintegrate the moment you panic.
So what does this all mean? I'll ask you, the listener, directly. Why attempt to learn these incredibly high-stakes, physically demanding skills on a 200-horsepower superbike when there are infinitely better, more accessible tools to build your craft?
It is so much smarter to step down from the MotoGP stratosphere and look at the reality of highly capable, smaller displacement motorcycles. Let's look at what is actually in real-world garages.
Let's talk about the Kawasaki ZX4RR. This is a fascinating contrast to the Ducati. It also has a 4-cylinder engine. It also screams to a glorious 16,000 RPM. But the engine is only 399 cc.
And that tiny displacement dictates the physics of how the bike behaves. Because the engine cylinders are so small, the physical stroke of the piston is incredibly short.
Right.
Short strokes simply cannot generate low-end twisting force or torque. They only generate power by spinning at astronomical speeds. As the Motorcyclist Review and owners on the Earth's V4R Reddit note, if you like revs, it is a candy store. But if you like torque, bring patience. You have to constantly dance on the shifter to keep it boiling in the high RPMs.
But out of the box in the United States, that engine is actually being suffocated, right?
Yes. U.S. noise and emissions regulations heavily restrict small, high-revving bikes like the ZX4RR and the ZX6R. To unlock the ZX4RR's true mechanical potential, which is right around 80 horsepower, riders immediately turn to the aftermarket.
We saw this all over the forums. Riders are sending out their engine computers for ECU flashes from tuners like 2WDW to literally rewrite the bike's brain. And then they replace the heavy stock exhaust with slip-ons from Yoshimura, Toshe, M4 Street Slayer, or Akrapovic. But reading through the installation guides, I noticed everyone mentioning they had to install something called a servo buddy. What exactly is that?
Modern sport bikes have a physical valve inside the factory exhaust piping. It's connected to a small electric servo motor. The computer closes this valve at low RPMs to muffle the sound and pass noise emissions tests. When you bolt on an aftermarket racing exhaust, you throw that valve in the trash. But if you just unplug the servo motor, the bike's computer freaks out and throws a glaring check engine light on your dashboard.
Because the computer's looking for a motor that is no longer there.
Exactly. A servo buddy is a small electronic microchip plug. You clip it into the wiring harness, and it tricks the ECU into thinking the exhaust valve motor is still there and functioning perfectly. It keeps the dashboard warning-free.
It's basically a rite of passage for sport bike owners. But even unlocked, the ZX4RR is a highly aggressive, track-oriented machine. What if someone wants that aggressive Grand Prix look, but they are a true beginner, or maybe restricted by an A2 license in Europe?
Then you look at the Aprilia RS457 GP replica. This is a machine engineered explicitly for the street rider. It weighs just 159 kilograms and uses a 35 kilowatt parallel twin engine, which produces excellent low-end torque for city traffic.
So you completely avoid that terrifying 180 horsepower rain mode trap. But it still has premium features. The spec sheet lists a standard quickshifter and ride-by-wire throttle. Just to clarify, ride-by-wire means there isn't a physical steel cable connecting the twist grip to the engine, right?
Correct. When you twist the throttle on the Aprilia, a sensor reads the position of your hand and sends a digital signal to the engine computer. The computer then calculates exactly how much air and fuel to give the engine based on the riding mode you selected. It gives a beginner incredibly smooth power delivery, allowing them to focus entirely on their vision, their cornering speed, and perfecting that trail braking technique without the constant fear of launching themselves into orbit.
I love that.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, whether you are carving canyons on a ZX4RR wrapped in sticky Continental Conti Attack SM2 tires or commuting through the city on an Aprilia, street riding requires a level of practical reality that track weapons completely ignore.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the V4R or the Kawasaki's. There's literally zero storage on these bikes. You couldn't fit a folded map under the passenger seat, let alone a sandwich. If you actually want to use these machines to commute to work, you have to engineer your own luggage solutions.
And the Cycle World piece highlighted how riders solve this. You can't use a normal school backpack. It will catch the wind and pull you backward. Riders rely on aerodynamic, motorcycle-specific backpacks with harness systems that lock across the chest to keep the arms free, like the Kriega R25 or the Velomaki Speedway 28L.
And if you don't want a backpack ruining your airflow, we saw a ZX4R owner on Reddit utilizing a Taichi RSB 312 10-liter seat bag. It just straps tightly right over the tiny tail section. It's a small detail, but it's the difference between actually riding your motorcycle every day and just leaving it on a rear stand in the garage to stare at.
Because motorcycles, no matter how expensive, are meant to be ridden.
Well said. We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started in the absolute stratosphere with the $50,000 Ducati Panigale V4R, unpacking the physics of his ground effect aerodynamics, that screaming 16,500 RPM titanium-laced engine, and the pure mechanical logic behind its rattling dry clutch and analog suspension.
And we brought it all the way down to the pavement, examining the psychological trap of electronic safety nets, the mechanical reality of trail braking, and the joy of wringing out a lightweight, accessible machine like a ZX4RR or an Aprilia RS457 in the real world.
It really highlights the glaring difference between simply buying a high-performance vehicle and actually possessing the human skill required to pilot it.
Which leaves us with one final question for you to explore on your own. If you had the money to afford a Ducati that exceeds 330 kilometers per hour, but you knew deep down that your own mechanical skills were holding you back from truly utilizing even a fraction of its capability, would you still buy the machine as a status symbol? Or would you invest that $50,000 into perfecting your own human engineering first?
That is a thought to chew on during your next ride. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and keep your eyes out for the next deep dive. See you out there.